I could end your career right now. 7 words from Justice Clarence Thomas slammed into Jasmine Crockett like a gavel strike, freezing a packed Capitol hearing in its tracks. In just 47 seconds, a centuries-old courtroom tradition shattered before millions watching live. What could drive a Supreme Court justice to unleash such a threat on her? Dawn broke over Washington, D.C. The Capitol dome glowed gold, the air tight with anticipation. On the marble steps, crowds gathered. Signs high, cameras clicking, voices low. Jasmine Crockett stepped from a black sedan, navy suit crisp, eyes sharper than the morning chill. In her hand, a battered leather-bound Constitution. Halfway up, she paused to read a folded note from Linda Hayes, a widow in West Virginia. They said my husband's death was an accident, but the company cut corners. She pressed it to her chest and kept walking. Across the plaza, a line of black SUVs rolled to a stop. Clarence Thomas stepped out, flanked by aides in dark coats. His face was unreadable, his stride slow and deliberate, as if the verdict was already written. The cameras caught them both in the same frame. The crowd's noise dropped for a moment. Today, these two paths were destined to collide, and America would choose which one it believed in. Among the crowd, Reverend Elijah Brooks stood like an oak tree in the wind. His back was straight, his suit a little worn, his eyes steady. He had marched with Dr. King, been beaten, jailed, and never stopped showing up. When he saw Jasmine, he tipped his hat. A quiet salute only she understood. A few rows back stood Linda Hayes, clutching the same folded note Jasmine had just read. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the years of waiting for someone to fight for her husband's name. She didn't shout, didn't wave a sign. She just watched Jasmine like she was watching her last hope. Near the steps, Senator Maria Cortez slipped through the press. A veteran of political wars, she moved with the urgency of someone who knew the rules and the dangers. Leaning in close to Jasmine, her voice was low but sharp. Thomas doesn't debate, Jasmine. He destroys. Don't give him the opening. Jasmine met her eyes and simply nodded. Outside, the noise swelled. Protesters on one side chanted for workers' rights. The other shouted about overreach and keeping politics out of the courts. Camera crews panned across signs, faces, and clenched fists. Inside, Clarence Thomas conferred with a small group of lobbyists. Their heads leaned in, papers slid across the table, a quick exchange of nods. It wasn't just strategy, it was a plan. He didn't just plan to win, he planned to end her. The hearing room was packed, every seat filled, the air heavy with anticipation. Cameras swung toward Jasmine as she rose for her opening statement. Her voice was steady, her words sharp, tracing a decades-long trail of broken promises. Unsafe mines, unpaid overtime, pensions stolen in boardroom deals. She wasn't just reading facts. She was laying out a case that felt personal to every worker watching from home. Halfway through, a low chuckle sliced through the room. Clarence Thomas leaned back, lips curling. "You're dramatizing politics, Congresswoman," he said, each word dipped in ice. And the American people deserve better than theatrics. Jasmine's eyes locked on his, steady. "Better than theatrics?" she said, her voice sharp. "I want to tell that to the widows and soldiers you've ruled against." Linda Hayes sat there, eyes glistening but steady, giving the smallest of nods. The kind that says, "Keep going. Don't you dare stop now." Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed tight on their faces. You could feel the room split, half leaning in, half bristling. Thomas smirked, tapping his fingers on the desk like he was already bored. Jasmine straightened, her voice rising just enough to claim the space again. But what happens when the most powerful man in the room decides your career should end before you've even begun? Jasmine didn't waste time. She clicked to the next slide, a chart showing years of rulings where corporate donors had quietly benefited. Names, dates, amounts. The kind of detail you couldn't wave away as coincidence. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching faster. Clarence Thomas's jaw tightened. Then, crack! The sound of his gavel sliced through the air like a gunshot. The room jolted. "I could end your career right now," he said, voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. Gasps erupted from the gallery. A veteran in the front row froze mid-breath, eyes wide. Maria Cortez's hands clenched on the table, knuckles whitening, but she said nothing. Even Thomas's aides shifted uneasily, their eyes darting toward the cameras now flashing like a lightning storm. Jasmine stood still, not a flicker of fear, not yet. You could almost hear the gears turning behind her eyes, weighing the risk, the opportunity, the millions watching at home. When the silence stretched, thick and electric, until you could feel every heartbeat in the room. And in that moment, the nation was holding its breath. What she did next would become one of the most replayed moments in congressional history. Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, her hand slid to the desk, fingers curling around the battered, leather-bound Constitution she'd carried in that morning. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted it into the air. The motion was unhurried, almost defiant, as if every inch upward was its own statement. Thomas's eyes locked on hers, cold and unblinking. Jasmine didn't look away. The room seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them, staring across the table like gunslingers waiting for the draw. Cameras zoomed tight. You could hear the click of each shutter in the silence. From the gallery came a low, steady voice, Reverend Elijah Brooks, leaning forward just enough for the microphones to catch it. "Don't back down, child." The words floated into the charged air, half prayer, half command. Jasmine's eyes softened for the briefest second, a flicker of gratitude, then steeled again, sharp as tempered glass. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The Constitution stayed raised, a worn and weathered witness in her grip, telling the story for her. Every crease in its cover, every yellowed page, seemed to shout what she chose not to say. And somewhere beyond the marble walls, millions were watching. What would you say to the man who could erase your career with a single motion? The moment Jasmine raised that Constitution, the internet ignited like a dry field hit by lightning. Within minutes, hashtags like "Don't Back Down" and "Constitution Moment" were climbing to the top of Twitter's trending list. Clips of her silent defiance looped endlessly. One shot from a reporter's phone hit 1 million views before the hearing even adjourned. People weren't just sharing the video. They were adding their own captions, calling her the voice we've been waiting for. Cable news caught on fast. CNN cut from international coverage to run her stare down with Thomas on repeat, the anchor calling it an extraordinary moment in a very ordinary hearing. On Fox, commentators accused her of grandstanding, insisting it was performance over substance. MSNBC brought on labor leaders and veterans, who defended her, voice after voice saying they felt like she was speaking directly to them. Every replay, every heated panel debate only fed the fire. Inside the chamber, Senator Maria Cortez leaned toward Jasmine, her words a quiet warning. "That was bold, but now he'll come for you with everything." Before Jasmine could reply, a voice rang out from the back of the room, a reporter from the Washington Ledger, holding up a printed email. "Justice Thomas, can you explain this correspondence between your office and Apex Mining's lobbyists, dated last month?" The gallery erupted in murmurs. Thomas froze mid-step at the door, his aides instantly moving in to shield him. Jasmine's gaze sharpened. The fight had just taken a turn. Behind that door in Thomas's private chambers, the atmosphere was surgical. Aides gathered around a long mahogany table, folders spilling with printouts and notes. "We dig," one said flatly. "Law school files, old statements, financials, anything we can weaponize." Thomas sat at the head, silent, tapping his gavel against his palm in a slow, deliberate rhythm, like counting down the seconds to an inevitable strike. The real battle wasn't in that room anymore. It was the storm gathering outside, and it was only getting louder. The next morning, the hearing room was even more crowded. The media frenzy had pulled in new faces. Workers in overalls, veterans in uniform, students clutching hand-painted signs. Jasmine sat at the long table, her battered Constitution beside a stack of papers. When her turn came, she didn't start with a legal argument. She started reading names. One by one, she spoke them aloud. Miners who died in collapses that could have been prevented. Soldiers who came home only to fight for benefits they'd been promised. Civil rights activists beaten and killed for daring to demand the vote. Her voice didn't shake, but each name landed heavy, like a stone dropped in still water. In the gallery, Linda Hayes gripped a framed photo of her husband. Her fingers were white around the edges, holding on as if letting go might erase him. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Not once. A few rows up, the veteran who had watched Jasmine's standoff with Thomas the day before began to rise. Slowly, deliberately, he stood at attention. No words, no theatrics. Just a straight back, eyes forward, the kind of salute that says, "I recognize this fight." Cameras caught everything. The names, the photo, the salute. And somewhere in the middle of that silence, something shifted. This wasn't just politics anymore. It was personal. Jasmine lowered the paper and looked straight ahead. "How?" she asked, her voice steady. "Could anyone call that a favor and not a debt?" The room was silent after her last question, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. Jasmine let it hang for a heartbeat, then stepped closer to the mic. Her voice was steady, deliberate. "Justice is not a favor you grant us. It's the debt you owe to every American who bled for this flag." Right on cue, the large screens behind her flickered to life. Black and white images filled the walls. The Selma marches, boots caked in Alabama mud. Soldiers wading through the swamps of Vietnam. Firefighters on 9/11, their faces streaked with ash, carrying survivors down endless stairs. Each picture landed like a blow to the chest. The audience stirred. At first it was just a murmur, the shuffling of feet, a few quiet claps. Then the rhythm built, like a drum beat rolling through the chamber. Claps turned to cheers, cheers to a wave of people rising to their feet. Workers, veterans, students, all standing, all looking at her like she was speaking for them. For the first time, Clarence Thomas's expression cracked. The cool, untouchable mask slipped just enough to reveal a flicker of something. Surprise. Maybe even unease. He shifted in his seat, eyes narrowing at the screens, as if willing the images to disappear. But they didn't. They stayed. And so did Jasmine, unflinching, her hand resting on the worn Constitution at her side. She wasn't just making a point. She was making history. Do you remember a moment when justice felt personal to you? If you do, tell us in the comments, because those moments are what keep this fight alive. The applause was still rolling through the chamber when Thomas's hand twitched. He gave a sharp signal toward the sound booth. Across the room, a technician's fingers hovered over the switch to cut Jasmine's mic, then froze. The public gaze was too heavy, every camera locked in, every lens pointed their way. Thomas leaned forward, voice hard. "You're turning a hearing into a rally," he said, the words laced with disdain. It wasn't just an accusation. It was a warning, one meant to remind everyone who held the gavel. Before Jasmine could answer, Senator Maria Cortez was on her feet. Her tone was calm, but her words cut through the air. "The Congresswoman still has her floor time under procedural rules, and she's entitled to finish without interruption." It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of law, and everyone in the room knew it. Reverend Brooks, sitting in the gallery, folded his arms and leaned back with the faintest smile. He'd seen this play before, the powerful trying to silence the truth, and the truth finding a way to push through. The tension thickened. Thomas's jaw tightened, but he didn't give the signal again. Jasmine straightened her papers, her voice steady as if nothing had happened. The more they tried to shut her down, the more voices were about to rise. Thomas's patience snapped. He leaned forward, eyes locked on Jasmine, voice low and cutting. "Enough!" No mistaking the tone. It wasn't debate anymore. It was command. His hand flicked toward the sound booth, sharper this time, a silent order to act. The technician didn't hesitate. With a faint click, Jasmine's mic went dead. The sound of it, that hollow drop from clear audio to nothing, made the whole room flinch. Pooh, gasps rippled through the gallery, the kind people let out when they've just seen a line crossed in real time. Jasmine didn't move at first. Then slowly she straightened her spine and looked toward the crowd, not the bench. Her voice came without amplification, but it carried low and fierce. "If you silence me, you silence every worker, every widow, every soldier who still believes this flag means freedom." A few heads turned toward the gallery, as if waiting for someone, anyone, to respond. Thomas sat back, hands clasped, eyes cold. The room felt like it was holding its breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on every shoulder. But would anyone answer her call? The silence cracked like glass. From the middle of the gallery, Reverend Elijah Brooks pushed himself to his feet. His voice rolled out, deep and steady, a sound built from decades of marches in jail cells. Justice, the answer hit back instantly. For all. It wasn't a cheer. It was a statement, heavy and unyielding. The marble walls caught it and threw it back, louder, until the room felt smaller, tighter. Sorchana Brooks called again. Justice! And the crowd roared, for all! A rhythm formed, a heartbeat pounding through the chamber. Journalists in the press row turned their cameras toward the gallery, their hands moving fast over phone screens, capturing every second. The veteran in the front row rose, his back straight as a rifle, hands snapping into a salute. He didn't blink, didn't break the chant. Beside him, Linda Hayes clutched her husband's photo like a shield, her tears catching the light as her lips moved in time with the words. Around her, strangers linked voices, the sound building until it drowned out the hum of the air vents. Security along the walls shifted uneasily. One stepped forward, then stopped when he saw the red tally lights on the broadcast cameras. Any attempt to move in now would be played back on every network by nightfall. The chant rolled on, each call and answer hitting harder, the sound pressing against the high ceiling, shaking loose the illusion of control. And at the center of it all, Jasmine stood silently at her desk, eyes fixed on the bench, letting the people speak for her. The chant shook the chamber, and now it wasn't just the gallery. Senators on both sides of the aisle began glancing at each other, shifting in their seats. One stood, then another. Within seconds, a handful were on their feet, lips moving with the rhythm. Justice for all. Every TV camera in the room swung to capture the moment. Red tally lights glowed as the feed went live, and the images began flooding across screens nationwide. News producers barked orders into headsets. Cut to the hearing, stay on that shot. Outside, the sound broke through the heavy doors. Protesters paused mid-chant, recognizing the call from inside. Then they picked it up, hundreds of voices joining in, until the noise outside fused with the roar within. The marble steps of the Capitol became an amplifier. At the bench, Clarence Thomas leaned back in his chair, lips pressed into a thin line. No gavel strike now, no move to stop it. His eyes swept the room, but the tide had turned, and he knew it. For the first time in years, the court felt like it belonged to the people. By nightfall, every major news network had the footage on repeat. Jasmine's stare, the raised Constitution, the chant that shook the marble walls. It all played in endless loops, each replay cut from a slightly different angle. Anchors leaned in over their desks, voices charged, framing it as either a defining act of courage or a reckless provocation. Political talk shows lit up. Some commentators warned she'd painted a target on her back, that the backlash from powerful circles would be swift and unforgiving. Others called it the spark the movement had been waiting for, predicting her name would become a rallying cry in union halls and community centers across the country. Back in her office, Jasmine sat surrounded by stacks of unopened envelopes and an inbox overflowing past capacity. Letters from miners, nurses, veterans, teachers, hundreds of them, arriving within hours. Some offered thanks, others told personal stories of fights lost and rights stripped away. All of them carried the same undercurrent. You spoke for me. She read until her eyes ached, the glow of the desk lamp catching on the worn leather of the Constitution beside her. Outside, the city had gone quiet, but inside her mind the noise of the day still echoed. But would the establishment strike back harder? It was well past midnight when Jasmine finally stepped out into the cool DC air. The cameras were still camped along the sidewalk, their lenses tracking her every move. She didn't stop for questions, didn't glance toward the reporters. Instead, she walked straight to a small church hall on the city's east side. Inside, Reverend Elijah Brooks was waiting, seated at a folding table, a mug of coffee in front of him. Linda Hayes sat beside him, clutching the same framed photo she'd held in the gallery. Jasmine crossed the room without a word. Brooks rose to meet her, the lines on his face deepening as his eyes searched hers. "Child," he said, his voice low but firm, "you didn't just speak for them. You spoke for all of us still here. The words seemed to lift something off her shoulders, if only for a moment. Jasmine reached for him, and he pulled her into an embrace that felt like both a blessing and a vow. Lelinda stood, placing a hand on Jasmine's arm. Her eyes were wet, but her smile was steady. The three of them held there for a beat, the quiet broken only by the muffled clicks of cameras outside the window. The press had found them, and this moment, raw and unpolished, would be tomorrow's headline. Somewhere in the back of the hall, a light flickered. The world outside was still ready to fight. But in here, for just a moment, it felt like they'd already won something. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine was everywhere. Grainy phone footage showed her standing on small-town stages, sleeves rolled up, speaking to miners with coal still under their nails. In union halls, her voice echoed against cinder-block walls as she told workers their fight wasn't over. At veterans' gatherings, she listened more than she spoke, shaking hands like each one was a promise kept. Everywhere she went, the battered Constitution was with her. People lined up to touch it, as if the worn leather could pass some of her defiance into their own hands. Cameras caught the moments. Not staged, not polished. Just a woman carrying a fight from the marble floor of the Capitol to the cracked pavement of America's streets. The clips began to blend together, forming a kind of living montage. Jasmine under the harsh lights of a rally stage, Jasmine leaning in to hear a grandmother's story at a folding table. Jasmine walking through a sea of flags, pausing to look each person in the eye. Some called her reckless. Others called her a hero. But the one thing no one could call her was silent. On screen, the words appeared in bold white letters. Share this story if you believe every American has the right to call this land home. And then, the question that lingered like an open challenge. If you were in that room, would you have stood? Sometimes just a single moment of standing tall and holding your gaze can move the heart of an entire nation. That strength doesn't come from title or power, but from the belief that justice is a debt we all share. If one day you witness injustice, would you have the courage not to turn away and let your voice become the strength for someone else? If this moment stirred something in you, don't just watch it fade into the feed. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to First Shock, where one voice can shake the walls of power. Hit the bell, because the next fight for justice could be yours. Which moment stayed with you the most? Drop it in the comments, because your voice is part of this story now. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching.